Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today's is a good one, and I'm going to be exposing some Carolina rig baits that are being kept secret by a lot of top fishermen out there. You know, as we know, a Carolina rig is one of the best techniques that we have for catching numbers of fish, getting your bait into places you can't get a lot of other baits because you can fish it super deep. But generally speaking, when you think about a Carolina rig, you've got a lot of people that are throwing like some sort of straight-tailed worm, whether it's like a French fry or a general, something along those lines, or they're throwing like a Berkeley power worm, you know, a curly tail worm, or they're going to be using more along the lines of a creature bait, like a brush hog, something like that. You don't hear about guys throwing any of the baits I'm going to talk about here, but they are catching fish all around the country, and they are really excelling, and they're giving people the ability to put baits that aren't normally in the strike zone of where you would usually fish a Carolina rig. Before I get into that, I do want to remind you guys, though, that if you want to support the channel, please use the Tackle Warehouse affiliate link that I provide in the description of the video. It's a great way to support the channel, and it's very much appreciated when you do your shopping using that link. Also, guys, if you're looking for a little bit of help on your local lake, check out the lake breakdowns that I do through fishthemoment.com. Again, the link is in the video description. I provide 40 waypoints on each specific lake for a specific season of the year. Great way to give you some starting points as to how to go about breaking down a specific lake. And guys, a Carolina rig is a great way to break down most lakes. You know, you can fish a Carolina rig from shallow water to ultra deep water just by changing the size of the weight that you're going to throw. I've talked about Carolina rig setups before, so if you're not familiar with what a Carolina rig is, check out some of my other videos on that. I'll put a link at the end of this for another Carolina rig video so you can see how I like to set up a Carolina rig. But today we're going to talk about the baits. You know, I've got several baits here that are not getting used on a Carolina rig by most people. There are specific areas in the country where people are doing this, and there's specific anglers that are winning tournaments by doing this. So let's just dive right into it. The first bait that I want to talk about is a swim bait. A lot of people do not throw swim baits on a Carolina rig. This is just the Kitech. This is the 3.8 size. I generally like to throw the Kitech Fat Impact swim baits on a Carolina rig for a specific reason. It's because, and a lot of people don't know this, but they actually pour a little bit of a heavier substance in the bottom of the swim bait to keep their swim baits running at a very horizontal approach. So to keep it belly down, it doesn't allow the bait to ride high on either side. And the reason that's important on a Carolina rig is because you're just going to be rigging it on a basic EWG style hook. So when you rig this on there, you get the bait is running, you know, in the right position. It's running with the tail pointed down and the belly in the right position. Generally speaking, with most swim baits, you don't have to worry about a bait being weighted in the belly because you got it on a jig head, and the jig head is what's positioning the bait. But on a Carolina rig, it's important to have your bait running right, and that's why I like to go with the Kitech in this position, because it is made to run with the belly in the down position. So if you're not using a small swim bait on a Carolina rig, you're missing out. And the reason that's important is because a lot of times the fish that are living in those deep areas and the places you're going to be fishing a Carolina rig, their primary forage in that point in those places are bait fish. So whether you're fishing down south for spotted bass, largemouth on ledge lakes, or smallmouth on deep natural lake humps, you want to be trying to throw a small swim bait or even a big swim bait on a Carolina rig. Really good approach that very few people are doing. The next bait is kind of along those same lines. And this is one, guys, you probably, some of you are going to think I'm crazy with this, but it really works well. And that's to throw a square bill. This is the Berkeley 5.5 square bull, which is one of my favorites to use for this technique. And it's because it's more of a high float bait. So here, the reason this is important, to throw like a square bill over a deep diving crankbait or like a stick bait is that square bills are made to go through cover. So if I'm dragging this behind, a heavy weight on a Carolina rig with a couple foot leader, the square bill is going to be grinding along the bottom when you're pulling the bait, and when you pause the weight, it's going to float up. You want it to float up, which is why you want a bait that's a little bit higher floating. But you want something that's made to be more weedless because you're going to be grinding it down in the rocks, and maybe you've got some stumps down there. And your square bill, like the square bull here, is made to deflect off stuff. If you went with a shallower running crankbait, which is fine, you can try that, you're going to get hung up more. If you go with a straight minnow type bait or a jerk bait, well, jerk bait I'd recommend against because that's a suspending bait and it's going to be sitting on the bottom the whole time. You want your bait to rise up. But if you have a floating jerk bait, you can try that. The problem again is the bills on those baits are not made to deflect off cover like a square bill. But again, those will work too, but you're going to get a lot less snags with a square bill. And the importance behind this is what you're doing by using it on a Carolina rig is you're getting it down to places where fish don't normally see a crankbait. So if you've got fish that are down in 20 to 30 foot of water, you can now get your favorite square bill or crankbait down into that strike zone, which is a great bait for creating reaction strikes because it's deflecting off the bottom or whatever cover's down there. Very, very good technique. It's something that a handful of pros are doing, and you very rarely hear about it, but I can tell you without a doubt 100% that there are a lot of people winning tournaments doing this. A lot of guys like to long line or stroll a crankbait because you can get a crankbait down to depths you normally can't do. You don't need to do that. You can fish it on a Carolina rig and it gets you right down to those same depths. Again, a lot of times strolling is considered illegal in tournaments. So if you're a tournament fisherman and got to get your crankbait down, put a square bill behind a Carolina rig and you'll catch fish. Next up, this is a bait that hasn't been out that long, but I've had a lot of really good success. I've caught some giant smallmouth up here. This is the FishLab Slamamander. This is the small Slamamander size. I think, so this is the 4.5 incher. I think they come in a 6-inch size as well. I like this size because I like using it for smallmouth up here in the North Country. But you talk about a really good bait on a Carolina rig. It looks like a bottom creature, very natural. You still get a lot of boot tail kicking out of the tail on it. But it looks like a tadpole, it looks like a goby, and it looks like a mud puppy. And I'll tell you what, this bait is absolutely dynamite on a Carolina rig. And I know a lot of guys like throwing lizards on Carolina rigs, but this is like a hybrid swim bait, lizard, like goby style bait. It's really been working well for me. It's a relatively new bait, but I highly recommend checking it out. This is the Slamamander by FishLab. Works phenomenally well on a Carolina rig. Really good bait right there. And then the last one is is a long-standing favorite of a lot of people around the country. It's a bait that's been out for a while, but you don't hear about it used on a Carolina rig much. And that's a Zoom ultrawide Speed Craw. And I know this does not look like a standard Carolina rig bait, but I will tell you this, guys. If you fish anywhere that has smallmouth, you need to try this on a Carolina rig. It has been cashing checks all over the place, from Champlain, the Great Lakes, to over into the Wisconsin and upper Midwest region. It's just an absolute killer. And it catches largemouth, it catches spotted bass too. But this little guy on a Carolina rig has been catching deep water smallmouth for a long, long time now. I mean, probably one of the first tournaments I ever fished at the professional level was on Lake Champlain in a Bassmaster Open event. And the co-angler that I drew, this is what he was using. That's why I learned my lesson. And I saw what he caught with it, but I can assure you he was a travel partner of another pro in that event. And I quickly found out that guys are using this little guy for smallmouth all over the country. Again, Not a typical Carolina rig bait, but it is dynamite on one. Just super, super good. So these are 4 baits, guys, that I very, very rarely ever hear people talk about using on a Carolina rig, but I can assure you they are catching the fire out of them, because you're getting baits that aren't normally used on a Carolina rig. They're not normally used in those areas, and the fish don't get to see them, so they're reacting as if it's the first time they've seen them. So check them out. I'll put the links in the video description if you want to get a closer look at the profiles of each bait. But give it a try. Don't think with a Carolina rig you got to be throwing a worm or a creature bait or you know, your general style stick worms. It really is a very versatile technique. You just got to think outside the box a little bit, and you can present other baits to fish that normally don't get to see those baits. So thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned. Another video coming out tomorrow.